able to move forward with these in a way that we felt comfortable with?
Yeah, so the goal for them, if you want to go all the way back.
All the way back.
All the way back. The original Battle Force was Shadow Collective, right? And Shadow Collective, as a Battle Force, was there to create the narrative link between all the different mercenary units, right? So Maul was leading them. We had all of the narrative inclusions with the Black Sun, the Pike, Mandalorians, Super Commandos, those guys. And that Battle Force was created specifically to create a way for players to play Shadow Collective as essentially an exclusive army.
To bring all of those mercenary releases together in a thematic kind of like...
And that really laid the groundwork for what can a Battle Force look like.
And I think the important thing your Shadow Collective is outside of the existing framework of this is your faction, you have all the options available in your faction to create your army with.
Yeah, and then it gave you command cards, and it gave you all sorts of other things, right? Yeah. There are some unique units inside of Shadow Collective that can't be used inside of any of the main four factions. So that really set the framework that we were playing with. And then as we continued to develop, we developed the first four, one for each faction.
Right.
501st, Droid Invasion. Let's see if I can do it off pure memory,
because
this was a long time
ago.
You
can do it.
501st, Droid Invasion. Echo Base and Blizzard Force.
There you go. Nailed it.
Easy
peasy. Nobody even brought up Tempest Force.
Easy.
There's just a lot of forces.
There are a lot of forces, yeah.
They just really like naming their formations after weather.
Yeah. Look, you can't blame them. It's a great name.
It's a great name.
But yeah, so the goal for them is essentially to create thematic lists that people can play that have something that ties them together narratively. And when I say something, I don't mean like Blizzard Force. Everybody was at Blizzard Force. I mean like the new command cards or special upgrades or special units or something like that, right? For each of those things. And as Shake mentioned, we've made a lot of things like this in the past at other stuff, and we got to learn about the pitfalls and the good things. Good. What's the opposite of a pitfall? Good thing? Good thing.
Good thing. I like good thing.
Good thing.
Good thing, triumph,
Great.
I don't know.
Triumphs? Sure. I'll take triumphs.
Sure.
Triumphs and tribulations.
Maybe a bit strong, but that's
a bit strong.
But yeah, so taking what we've learned from other systems and things like that, and how we applied that to the Legion Battle Forces, which is we don't want them to be the primary way to play. We want them to be a supplemental way to play for players to have as an option, not to replace the norm.
Right.
And that's always the goal whenever we're making a Battle Force, right? Is to make it supplementary to the normal faction, but not smothering or replacing. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm out of words today.
We definitely, it's whenever we make a Battle Force, we don't want that to replace to be the standard way to play that faction, right? Like whenever we make a new Battle Force, it's kind of taking the greater faction as a whole and compartmentalizing it into a bucket, and whether that bucket is tied together through, a narrative reason, it's this, formation that was present at this specific battle or this specific period in time, or it's like a mechanical kind of glue that ties it together. Often it's both. We always want that bucket to be more restrictive than the larger kind of pool that is the faction at large, right? So that was one thing that we tried to do, and succeeded in some places better than others. But
sure.
I mean, I think, like overall, while we're talking about this being narrative, not the only way to play, the fact of the matter is that in a competitive, if you're looking at the game competitively from efficiency standpoints, there are just going to be Battle Forces that offer what a competitive player is looking for better than perhaps taking the whole faction. It's as you add more and more Battle Forces, you're going to see some rise to the top, some lie in the middle, and some just be more for like, I love the idea of this theme, I'm going to move towards it. It's no different than talking about the balance curve for units themselves or for offerings within the game. The goal on our end is to make sure that that curve remains within its standard parameters, right? You're not playing a perfectly balanced game. That's not interesting, and it's not why anyone comes, I think, to these style of games. And if you do, you're probably in the wrong place, because the fact of the matter is that once you give something a different number of a stat,
it's impossible.
It's no longer perfectly balanced.
It's impossible to do. You can't.
Not everything can be a 1.
You can get close.
You can get
but
close.
You can never make it all the way.
And that is, as we talk about in all the other dev and design panels, right? Our philosophy is to keep that curve as close together without actually having the ends touch. Now you mentioned, like not everything goes perfectly right when you start, brand new ideas, kind of readjusting and learning from the data that's given, and then making those adjustments to make sure that we maintain that curve. always important, and we've kind of begun to learn those things as we go forward. I want to talk a little bit about the advantages structure, because I think this goes back to a little bit of the perils and pitfalls that we've seen with other systems. Obviously, one of the biggest pitfalls that you can have is when battle forces give you, or like a thematic pairing gives you, either free points, extra units, access to things above what you can get from the normal.
Yes.
So talk a little bit about some of those, and then how do you look at the things that we believe haven't worked as well in the past,
Sure.
and apply that to the advantages and positives for a more narrow focus.
Yeah, so if if a battle force is so restrictive that it works out that it's acceptable to have additional units or things like that, and when I say additional units, I don't mean like new units, I mean like you get 900 points instead of 800 points when you're playing the game, right? That's probably just not a good idea, because if all of your points are balanced properly, or as close to properly as you can get, and you give somebody, I mean, I don't know the percentage, what is that, 12% more? You got to make it like you can only take stormtroopers, but you get 12% more stormtroopers. But
that's not very compelling at the end of the day.
Yeah, and then nobody enjoys that, right? So like, if that's going to be a cool battle force, like you have to do something real weird to make that work out. So we very quickly identified that's not a direction that we want to go, right? We don't want to go into the you get free heavy weapons or whatever, you get this kind of stuff. It's not what we want to do, and because it doesn't work, right? But then the other direction that we went, and I think is the correct way to go, is things like command cards or special unit cards or special rules in general, right? Like the Ewoks, Bright Tree Village has that kind of stuff going on. So like there's just a lot of other buttons and levers that we can push inside of battle forces to make them very interesting and unique, while not just granting free points essentially. So
let's you mentioned the Ewok battle force. Let's talk a little bit, Andrew, about those benefits and kind of how that battle force came together. Like, looking at that, give us kind of the overview of the goals, the ideas, and why those different benefits that they get, including the Chewbacca ATST card, make that battle force kind of function in the way that we envision it functioning.
Yeah, so when we were first having the conversations about how we wanted Ewoks to function in the game of Legion, we first decided that we did not want it to be something that was just tacked onto the Rebel faction at large. So we wanted to make it restrictive in some way. It didn't make sense to have, some of the Rebel units running along next to the Ewoks, like Mandalorians or whatever. It just didn't really work thematically.
Maybe so.
As cool as that would have been. But so we really looked at what makes sense thematically and narratively, and how can we also create mechanics to tie into that. So we kind of wanted to do something that had this idea of the Ewoks working together as a tribe, right? They are technologically primitive compared to the Empire, and yet they're able to triumph over these, triumph over the Galactic Empire, the most fearsome military power in the galaxy. So we looked at doing some things that kind of hadn't really been done yet in Legion, with having the ideas of certain characters that are just purely there for support, like Logray or C-3PO. Having units that synergize based on their position on the table relative to each other, and then just doing wacky things like insatiable curiosity, including Chewbacca in the ATST with Incognito, the OP kit, Papalu's Wild Ride, which happened because Michael Plummer said, you should make that Ewok that steals the speeder bike as a unit. And then that turned into an OP kit. So thanks, Plummer. That was a great suggestion. But it was always from the very beginning focused on what cool mechanics can we come up with for the Ewoks that make them play just like they seem in the movies and are different within their kind of own restrictive bucket inside the Rebel faction.
And I think there's also something to mention here that like making Bright Tree Village and Shadow Collective is very different than making 501st.
Yes,
or
absolutely.
Droid Invasion Force, right? Because those are essentially unique armies that, like, you're not building a rebel army in the same way when you build a rebel Bright Tree Village army, right? Like, it's super restrictive on what rebel units you can take. And when we're building those, we get to design the Ewoks as an army, right? It's not hey, this is a supplemental thing that gets added into your other armies.
Right.
You can, because they are mercenaries for some of them, but we do get to make it a sort of inclusive package and we can design around
And-
that in a closed space
and, yeah.
without having to worry about
Right.
ruining rebels by giving them an ATST.
And the fact that they're siloed, they're siloed like that lets us get very creative with some of their abilities and command cards. So like we tried to make a lot of their command cards this kind of idea of, like I said, either working together as tribe, the courageous counterattack, or have this kind of ambushy feel. I forget the names of the cards off the top of my head, but we wanted to capture the theme in the cards
Right.
in ways that we maybe would not have been able to if we also had to account for balancing them as part of the larger rebel faction.
Well, and I think, one of the things to go back to kind of the conversation about what are the battle forces meant for, what is kind of the goal, right? And the goal is to create thematic armies that have weaknesses, they have strengths.
Right.
Some of them will obviously, again, have more efficiencies than others. I think the Ewoks are really interesting in the fact that right off the gate, they struggle against armor. So one of the things that you plug into the battle force is how do they deal with this, right?
Right.
If you were able to take Ewoks as an army without the battle force at all, you'd be lacking, your Chewbacca and an ATST, a big part of their armor punch. You'd be lacking their command cards that allow for the trap, right?
Right.
The log trap.
The log traps, right.
And those things get plugged in. It doesn't necessarily cover the deficiencies.
No.
But it gives players tools to be able to work around that, in addition to what the battle force does well or what the strength is there.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, just to touch on that for a second, you bring up that they're bad against armor. With the Ewoks specifically, I think it was really interesting because kind of near the end of their development is when we decided, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we had an Imperial force to play against them? And so we decided to make Tempest Force, who is all about armor and speeders. And so you kind of have this other force that is, in a sense, tailor-made to fight against Ewoks and show off their weaknesses. Which we saw on a stream. Sorry, but it's interesting that in that specific instance we made these two battle forces that are meant to be better than others in certain ways and be weak to each other in certain ways.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about those first four battle forces, right?
Yeah.
As kind of the exemplars of what battle forces could be. The post Shadow Collective, which is kind of unique in its own way because it's the only way to play all the mercenaries together, right? So it already has its own shtick. Now you come into these full factions that have their own, pick and choose efficiency armies. They play in very specific ways. You're looking at battle forces to say, okay, let's capture a moment in time. Let's capture this feel. Let's capture this piece of media and create a force that allows players to feel like they're building a thematic force against that. What are you looking at in those situations? Like, how do you identify those things? What were you hoping to get out of each of the four that you made?
Just to talk broadly, right? I think one of the important things for me when we were creating these was to really kind of change up the force organization charts and play with what should be on the table for each of these different battle forces. So, like, Tempest Force gets 3 ATSTs, right? Because they can take the Commander 1 and then the 2 other ones. And I realize we're talking about the original 4, and that's not an original 4.
Right.
Work with me here. Blizzard Force gets extra scouts, things like that, because we see lots of scouts in Blizzard Force, and we know that they were there from the different media and all the references on Hoth and stuff. We see the Defenders, so you see a lot of defensive structures, veterans, that kind of stuff. So getting those force organization charts correct, also in... blanking on it now, not Echo-based Defenders, you can play the entire cast of the film in one time, and that's the first time that's able to be done because they were all there, right? And I think that's very cool. So like getting thematic wins in how players build their forces, I think is very important whenever we're doing battle forces. And then getting command cards is kind of really what we focused on these first four. To really tell the story of what each of these different battle forces is doing.
Well, and I think also the command cards, especially in these, right, they were utilized in similar ways to what we talked about the Ewoks, in that they fill kind of the gaps or the deficiencies that are crippling or that are identified as like, this force doesn't do this well, but it does it so poorly that it struggles, right? It makes this, and again, that comes back to balancing the curve. So it's very interesting. And another good example of this beyond the command cards was the heavy response stormtroopers.
Yes.
In Blizzard Force, You want to talk a little bit about how that came out through playtesting and feedback on what made that force non-functional and how we kind of had this solution in order to address the significant deficiency.
Yeah, I mean that originally came out in the playtesting for Blizzard Force. The playtesters were giving us the feedback repeatedly of they're really struggling against armor with any sort of impact. Really the only source of impact in the list was the speeder bikes at the time, and so we were talking about, okay, what are options that we can do, because there weren't really any of the other units that we could put into the battle force that would make sense. And so we had this idea of, well, what if we make battle force specific units? You know, we can play with the subtitles on the cards, so we could have a card that said stormtroopers for the unit, but then have heavy response unit underneath it, and you know, we could do wacky things like give them 2 heavy weapons, and then it's a unique thing for just this battle force.
Yeah, we like to do weird stuff sometimes.
Yeah.
And like the 2 heavy weapon thing, we had kind of had that idea with Dark Troopers as well, right?
Yeah, it
So it's
came
like, can we
from
put
what
it
we were
here?
already
Can we do
doing with
that?
Dark
Right.
Troopers,
Like,
for
oh,
sure.
well, we could reuse that idea here, and can we create this interesting unit that solves a problem? Because you're only limited to 2 stormtrooper units, right? But we need more impact heavy weapons.
Yeah.
So.
And then obviously, you know, some of the things since the battle forces were introduced, a large portion of the rollout of the battle forces has been dictated by the release schedule, right? So we've seen the Imperial Remnant, we've seen Ewoks, we've seen Tempest Force to kind of create that 40th anniversary Return of the Jedi kind of feel. Just due to how these forces were released and how the release schedule has kind of gone, you know, releases are planned 2+ years ahead of time. You can't really like shift things around. We haven't seen a lot of, let's say, quote unquote, love for the Clone Wars era.
Sure.
But it's mini extravaganza, and we love a good surprise. So why don't we go ahead and fix that, or begin on the road to fix that? And we'll start with the Wookie Defenders Battle Force, which is going to be available
Surprise.
to people right. Well, now I think it's
and
going to be available on the website after we're done here. But you can go
sure.
download these rules and start playing
Yes.
with the Wookie Defenders Battle Force for the Galactic Republic. So you want to walk us through what this force does, what makes it cool?
Yeah, sure. So this is something that we know the community has been clamoring for a really long time. It is a battle force for the Galactic Republic faction. Your Wookiee Defenders, it's meant to represent the scene that we see in Revenge of the Sith, the Battle of Kashyyyk. I'm going to steal Shik's laptop here so I can see the...
I mean, if you can read it, you might have to
Yeah,
zoom
no,
in.
we're gonna zoom just a little bit because I don't want to get it wrong for everyone. So this battle force does have some clones that you can take, but it's mostly focused on the Wookiees. So for your commander, you can take Yoda, Chewbacca, Wookiee Chieftain. You get 0 to 1 Special Forces, which is an ARC Trooper, no strike teams, and Wookiee Warriors, but we'll get to that in a second because the main special rule for this battle force is that you get to count your Wookiee Warriors, the Noble Fighters unit, which I believe is the melee ones, as core units for the purposes of battle cards and army construction. So you can have up to 6 of those units, and they count as core for things like Hostage Exchange, other battle cards. You can also take 0 to 2 Phase 2 clones, 0 to 1 Bark Speeder as support.
Just one little guy zooming around.
A Fluttercraft, which we'll get to in a second. We have a surprise there.
One moment, please.
0 to 1 ISP and 0 to 1 Saber Tank wraps up the rest of the rank requirements. Also, you have the special rule of the first time each round that a miniature and each Wookiee Warrior unit is defeated, they get to make a Speed 1 move towards... No, they just a Speed 1 move. It's very small text, forgive me.
It's wee.
It's
Do you want to clarify how many Wookiees you can potentially take in this force?
You can potentially take up to...
I mean, if points weren't an issue.
If points were an issue, you could theoretically take up to 10. So...
Because it's 6 core for
6
the melee,
core for
and
the
then
melee.
you can
And then
special
3 for the
forces.
6 for the
Liberators.
core, and then you could go up to 4 with the special forces of the other unit.
That's a lot of Wookiees.
It's a lot of Wookiees. Again, points are probably a problem. Now, you mentioned the Fluttercraft.
I did.
One of the things through testing that we kind of like came up for with the Fluttercraft was we wanted to give it a little punch because
We did.
this battle force does lack some of the full options from the Galactic Republic Army, like many battle forces do. It's restrictive.
Yeah.
Talk us through the changes to the Fluttercraft
So-
and why they were made.
Yeah, we definitely wanted to focus the Battle Force on the Wookiees and not have a huge clone presence there. And there's obviously a very limited number of Wookiee units. And so we were looking at the existing options, and we said, well, let's look at the Fluttercraft. You know, we know that you know, it kind of has a reputation of not being the strongest piece in the GAR arsenal. So what can we do to that? And so we went
heart.
Look, the ship workers at Appazana Engineering worked very hard.
They
all
worked
right,
very
I'm
hard.
not demeaning them at all.
They also make
But,
a Wookiee catamaran, which I
they
still
do.
haven't seen yet. I would love to see my catamaran to be added to this battle.
Yeah, so we were looking at different options for how to make this Fluttercraft better, and one of the cool things about the Fluttercraft is it has one of the very few number of overrun weapons in the game, and so like what can we do with that? Also, the other gun is only in the rear arc, so it's like what can we do to give this thing more mobility to allow it to utilize both of those weapons more frequently and just be a more interesting, you know, miniature on the battlefield. And it went through several iterations. Some of them were very wacky, like you could like pick up and place it, and that proved to be way too much.
Anywhere.
So we initially settled on this new attack run keyword, which is the start of its activation. It can choose to increase or decrease its speed by 1, which will affect things like when it moves or when it does its compulsory moves. Yeah. So it'll make you a little bit more mobile. You won't have to swing out as far if you choose to go slower, or if you need to get to the other side of the battlefield, you can go up to speed 3. Just give it a little more maneuverability and how far it can move, but also more control over its positioning to let you use those crew weapons a little bit more, make them a little bit more interesting.
I love this thing. So.
The Fluttercraft?
It zooms around.
It
drops things on people.
Yeah, little wings.
And as Chad is pointing out, the point cost is slightly different. So.
As it should be.
As it should be.
Because it is unique. So we have our Kashyyyk Wookiees force. You mentioned Revenge of the Sith kind of being a little bit of an inspiration, so players can choose to just play all Wookiees all times, or they can do a mix and match to kind of reenact that beach scene. It felt only natural that we take the antagonistic force of the droids and do something that was kind of evocative of that, but also not particularly designed on Kashyyyk itself.
Right.
And that led us to the second Battle Force reveal of this stream, which is the
experimental droids.
Experimental droids.
Yeah, so both Fluttercraft versions are legal, yes, answering for chat. Yeah, so as Schick said, we wanted to capture kind of what the droids have at Kashyyyk, but didn't want to go 100% in on capturing that exact moment and do something a little bit more interesting. So this is the experimental droid Battle Force. We're going to go over the special rules first. So this Battle Force has a really cool special rule where at the start of each activation phase, you choose up to one of your commander units, and you put 3 surge tokens on that commander's unit card. And then once during one of your special forces, core, or support units activations that has AI, it can spend a surge token on that commander's card as a free action to do a variety of different things. It can increase their speed by 1, it can aim or dodge token, it can add a black or white and white die to its next attack pool. So you get this kind of limited resource on your commander that then your troops can use. Going to the rank requirements.
They can see those.
They can see those. I don't need to read it.
Yeah, they can see all that. Talk about the new unit card.
Yeah, so
the actual experimental droids.
Yeah, so the other part of this Battle Force is that kind of like the Wookiee one, you get to count Magna Guards as core. There's a new Magna Guard unit that you have to take for this Battle Force. You cannot use the regular ones. And they count as core for army selection and for battle cards. So we've got the Magna Guard prototype assassin droids. These are a little squishier than your normal Magna Guard, and they don't hit quite as hard. They're also missing some of the special rules that are on normal Magna Guard. They don't have bodyguard. The things will interact with your commander. So these are Magna Guard that are kind of, CIS is testing them out, maybe a new mark of them, but you can also take them in greater numbers than you normally would. There's 4 of them a unit, so you'll have 5 with the heavy weapon. And you can have more than you normally would in a normal CIS army. The other thing is there is a prototype Persuader tank that you can take, which is very similar to the existing one. It loses the transport capacity, but does get this special rule called Command Node, which is during the command phase, this unit may issue an order to a core unit at range 1 of it. And I believe, if I remember correctly, 1 or 2 of the weapons are a little bit weaker. not having the regular card in front of me. But it has the same upgrade options, and you have both of those units are slightly different units that you can take only in this Battle Force.
Yep, they're exclusive, and they will be available for print and play whenever they get added to the webpage momentarily.
Boom. Let's see. So, any kind of additional stories or kind of testing, background behind the scenes on these that you'd like to cover?
I do want to talk about the Fluttercraft a little bit more.
Talk about
Sure.
the
Because that went through a lot of iterations.
It did.
We did a lot of stuff. We tried out you can just place the Fluttercraft anywhere on the table
Yeah.
as a rule, and that was really cool, but it also turned out to be a bit much.
It was a bit much.
And then it turned
Sorry,
into
playtesters, if you're watching.
it was a traumatic couple weeks. And then we tried out some other things like bonus moves, even faster, even this kind of stuff. And I really like where we ended up with the tack run because it really lets players show expertise on the table because of how the compulsory moves work and the arc movement and the very specific stuff. So being able to visualize where it's going to end up as a player and how it's going to interact with the terrain on the table is awesome and super important. And I don't know, I really enjoyed it. I think the attack run rule. Yeah, it was cool.
I think one of the fun things for me working on this Battle Droid Battle Force was kind of figuring out these abilities on the commander that you can spend the tokens for, and what we could come up with to kind of breathe life into existing CIS units that were not super popular. Droidicas is one that is comes to mind pretty frequently. They've got several cost reductions and people still don't seem to like them very much, but so kind of thinking of ways we can make units like that, help units like that out. So they can spend one of these tokens to increase their speed by one, which mitigates one of their disadvantages of being very slow. Just things like that. How can we use these abilities to kind of breathe new life into existing units and let them do new interesting things without having to actually affect their rules at all. Do it with this kind of external way, top-down way. So
I like it.
yeah.
It's a cool way to go.
I'm glad you approve, because these are already done and they're live now. So if you didn't like it, well, sorry.
It's too late
You should
now.
have spoken earlier, months ago.
Yep.
Literal months ago, Pagani.
God, maybe even a year ago.
But thankfully, you like it. We're all good, and you're still good to post it.
We got a
great.
thumbs up from Ann.
With that,
Here we go.
I believe that we are at the end of kind of our outline and everything to show. So we're going to leave you with these two fantastic Battle Forces for your playing pleasure. Otherwise, have a wonderful night. Join us again tomorrow, 9 a.m. Pacific. These two, Simone Elliott and Marco Segovia, are going to
roadmap it up.
Just doing everything. They're going to be roadmapping it up, showing off some of the things that are going to be coming in the next 7 to 8 months, with a couple of surprises as well, I think, towards the end of it. So don't miss that.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yes.
And, of course, we have a full slate of stuff happening tomorrow as well on Ministrav, including a paint stream that should be pretty fun with one Dallas Camp immediately following the roadmap. So with that, thank you very much. Have a wonderful night. We're going to be doing our questions roundup, whatever it is, at 6:30, so in the next 20 minutes or whatever. So you can always join in for that. As always, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on the next one. Goodbye.